Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome back to this week's show our most regular guest, United States Congressman Dan Meuser of the 9th Congressional District. To refresh your recollection, Dan sits on some of the most important committees in the U.S. House of Congress, especially including oversight and investigations. So he has an in-depth and classified briefing knowledge of the war against Iran, which continues unabated. We will have an in-depth discussion of the prosecution of that war, as well as a status update of the newly renamed Save America Act. You may remember it started out as the SAVE Act. It is now the Save America Act because included in it is not only voter identification, it is now also to preclude boys from participating in girl sports and keeping them out of their locker rooms and bathrooms. It also will limit the transgressions of schools and teachers in indoctrinating young people in grade school against trans type of conversion therapy that those students should not be exposed to, except and with the permission and appearance and presence of their parents. So a couple of things that about 70 to 80% of Americans in every single poll agree with. That's what the Save America Act will cover, and we hope that gets done. And finally, we're going to look into the unconscionable misconduct of the insufferable Democratic leaders in Congress that have once again shut down the government for the purpose of defunding the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS. As a result, this means there's no funding for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, no funding for the Coast Guard, and important for tens of millions of Americans that want to travel by plane, TSA agents at airports. TSA meaning Transportation Safety Administration. All of these necessary things have been shut down, and once again, they are putting the burden on the backs of the constituency that they claim to represent, that being the Democrats. What is going to happen with tens of thousands of canceled flights as we head into spring break, Passover, and Easter holidays? We will end up with families not being able to see each other. Congratulations, Democrats.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Congressman, welcome back to the Volpe Report.
Chuck, always a pleasure to see you.
It is.
And even if it's virtual.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, you could tell you're in your, what this is now, your fourth term? 4 terms?
That it is.
4 terms. You can see your star rising into the echelons of power and responsibility. It's amazing how first-termers have a little more time to come in studio, and 4-termers spend more time in Washington and on fact-finding trips, and Godspeed. You're doing great work, but we're thrilled to get you any way we can.
Well, time flies, and whoever said may you live in interesting times apparently did not live in interesting times. But certainly with our president and being in the majority, we accomplishment has its benefit. Yeah. Motivational, moving forward. Yeah. So.
Well, I'm going to take my subjects that I had in my own head and I mentioned to you out of order because that's such a natural segue to what's going on. We need to talk about another futile, ridiculous, and pathetic attempt by Democrats to Shanghai the president's agenda that was overwhelmingly voted for by the American citizens. Over 80 million votes that he got. One of the main reasons he won. Overwhelmingly supported, Dan, in every poll I've seen, even from the left-wing media. Somewhere between 70 and 80% of Americans support immigration, shutting our border, and getting dangerous criminals out of this country. So they, however, have used Minneapolis, which is offensive to anybody who saw it. And by that, I mean the organized armed protests against ICE agents, the attacks on ICE agents, and all the things that occurred. Tragically, 2 people were killed because that's what happens when you spur people on with poisonous rhetoric. That's what happens. But having said that, they are not funding DHS, Department of Homeland Security, which, by the way, the collateral runoff damage, since TSA is under that, flights are being canceled by the thousands. So the people they're hurting are, again, their core constituency. Middle class, working class people that want to visit their relatives over Easter. Once again, it's like they shoot a bullet and it comes back and hits them in the head. But take it from there.
Well, I'll just say this. I'll start with this. They really don't care seemingly about the results. What they care about is their political position. And that's a scary thing, because chaos seems to be working for the Democrats. Or at least that's what their strategy is, and that's what they believe. And I can list a whole several instances where the chaos they create and the trouble is more important to them than solving the problem. And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but just on the healthcare debate, and that's a big thing up in Northeast Pennsylvania, everywhere. We came with solutions for the healthcare. We were going to do 2-year extensions. We were going to provide more subsidies. We were bringing the poverty level up to 4 or 5 times of the poverty level, so as we could offer up a negotiation, a compromise. They walked away from it. Why? Because they want to see the higher premiums and try to blame it on the Republicans and on President Trump. That's what we're dealing with here, and it's a very difficult situation. So here we have, first of all, we have the Iranian conflict, right? And we'll get to that. But they have shut down DHS because they had a problem with immigration and customs enforcement and the tactics that were being used in Minneapolis. But guess where those tactics came from? They came from 4 years of allowing people across our border, illegals into our country, 15 to 20 million of them. And all the data shows that at least 1 in 15 of those individuals are hardened criminals, not just here illegally, but many of them violent criminals. So therefore, we have to have ICE come into particularly sanctuary cities where many of them were sent to. And
they're like rat skins. Because that's what they
exactly.
are. Of course, that's where they're going to hide.
And so, and not to mention all the corruption that was going on in Minneapolis, and that's a whole different story to an extent. Nevertheless, we send our ICE officials up there. They decide to blow it up to no end, create all kinds of chaos, everything else, create a hostile situation. But what do Republicans do? What did the President Trump administration do? Sent up Tom Homan, backed off. Let's negotiate. Let's do things the right way. We fired our DHS secretary, by the way. Okay. We changed all of the leadership that was up there. We're trying to do what's right so as in the end, the immigration and customs enforcement can do its job. That DHS, which there's many other functions of DHS, of course, FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Assistance, that little thing that covers all the people that you're referring to, TSA. This is the second time, Chuck, the second time within a few months that the Democrats have caused the TSA agents not to get paid. Okay, there's no other way of looking at it. They cause this. Why? Because they think disruption helps them in their political gains. So this is seriously outrageous. We're willing to work with them on DHS, as I stated. We're negotiating. We're compromising. The White House just sent another a note, a message where $80 million more would go to training. More, even in our bill, we had the body cams. All kinds of things to straighten things out. Tom Homan has come out and stated how we'll do things we won't do the type of apprehensions that were being done before. Our focus will be on the criminal elements, and yet here we sit today on March 18th with DHS still shut down and the TSA and other matters continuing to spiral downward and causing chaos. So it's unbelievable.
Well, what I hope at some point, people are smart, Dan, and they're intelligent. And what I hope at some point, and this cuts across party lines, Democrats, Republicans, independents, they understand the Democratic Party, and this goes back to COVID-19, is willing to, there's no amount of sufferance that they're not willing, the Democratic Party is not willing to put on the backs of American citizens, working people that they claim to represent, to feed their base, their radical Marxist, radically progressive base, and to get their policies, their disruption, their chaos, their anarchy, that basically they're going to let their base, the tail wag the dog, and if they have to affect millions, tens of millions of American lives that will have to suffer for their agenda, they have no problem. So I'm just saying, how evil has that system become that they're willing to sacrifice and disrupt people's lives for their agenda so they can show they're standing up to Trump and they're fighting his agenda? They tried lying, Dan, in the first term of Trump back in 2017, the Russian hoax, all that nonsense. They impeached him twice. Well, now no one believes them. They're like the little boy who cried wolf. They can't go to the media now and create lies because some of them still might go to jail over it. Now they're just disrupting whatever they need to do. It's despicable and disgusting.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Coast Guard is shut down. We have issues with drones or off of California. They've got the Coast Guard shut down. Our cybersecurity system is shut down. And you want to know what even makes this even worse, Chuck? There's a long-term, there's a more grander plan on their part. The reason that they're determined to shut down ICE is because the 15 to 20 million illegals that came into the country, they don't want them going anywhere. They don't want to lose a million. They don't want to lose any of them. They want them to be able to build the census so they can add more congressional districts. And they want to declare amnesty should they get back into power so as they can give them citizenship.
And the right to vote.
That is the plan. And you know what's amazing? Here they're talking to us about, we have this SAFE Act where we want to have ID and we want to have only citizens can register to vote, right? And they're saying, oh my goodness, how can you federalize elections? That's so bad. In the last Congress,
they tried.
Their HR didn't try. I mean, they had a complete, utter, comprehensive changes and renewal and whole different system for every state to follow. And by the way, one of the provisions in there was no ID required. There are 36 states that require ID. Pennsylvania's not one of them.
Right, no kidding.
No ID required. And so many other things that we don't have time to go through, simply outrageous. That's the long-term plan, Northeast Pennsylvania and Central Pennsylvania. Yeah. That's what they want to do. That's why they're fighting that. That's why they want to shut down ICE. They don't want to lose any of these voters, and they want to create an atmosphere with amnesty and everything else and then throw in, make Washington, D.C. a state, so they pick up two U.S. senators.
Puerto Rico.
And they think Puerto Rico will do it for them as well. So that's truly their long-term plan. Look, that's what we're fighting against.
Well, you're fighting for the future of America and against the radical dystopian future for America that they're advocating. You said a couple great things in there, and I want to kind of pick up on this. And this comes, like more of a suggestion. You're in a position of power there to maybe talk to people. I don't know if you've already discussed this. You understand fully well that they have created exceptions to the filibuster in the Senate. It's called budget reconciliation. So that for anything that fits in budget reconciliation, Dan, that's exempt. So 50 plus 1, a simple majority passes the budget, passes anything that comes in under budget reconciliation, I should say. Mm-hmm. So my suggestion is this. Why not funding that has been appropriated and passed under budget reconciliation? Why would not that be equally exempt from the filibuster? For example, the cutting of DHS funding. That should be exempt. That should be a 50 plus 1. You shouldn't need to get to 60 to shut that down. So why not create something going forward so this fiasco does not get repeated?
Well, we certainly want to. We're in the planning stages right now for a Reconciliation 2.0, where some of this could certainly come into play, including, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, healthcare, where we're getting there. Right now, I brought up the SAFE Act. As you can see, we don't even have enough Republicans, unfortunately, to call for changing the filibuster,
right,
to getting a standing filibuster, for instance.
Right.
Look, the SAFE Act is very, very crucial. I mean, it requires ID. It requires only registered people to vote. It says no boys in girls' sports, and you need parental guidance for genitalia operation,
for mutilation of children,
of mutilation and medications. So that sounds pretty reasonable. That's why the president wanted to name it not just the SAVE Act, the Save America Act, because a lot of people think these things need to be done. Because the far left, when you say the tail is wagging the dog, it's really the far left that's wagging the Democrat Party.
The whole thing.
And you know what? Many of my friends that are Democrats, they make excuses for it. Oh, it's not that bad. Oh, maybe it's the boogeyman. No, it's not the boogeyman. Boys are playing in girls' sports where school districts and all allow it. And it's very disruptive to Title IX and to many people's lives. And as I stated earlier, their long-term plan, they don't want to give up the gains that they think they've made. And that is, all these illegals that have come into our country.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, before you even get to the amnesty and the citizenship and letting them have the right to vote, that's the end game plan of the Democrats. A lot of people don't understand. So why now, since I have friends who are Democrats, well, they can't vote now. They're not in the voter rolls. And they're missing the point, as you have eloquently said in past shows, and I've talked about. They need their bodies there because they're counted in the census, whether they can vote or not. And so what does that mean? What that means is if it's based on population, how many congressional seats you get, which it is, right? That way, let me put it this way. If the illegals are put out of the country, California will lose 5 or 6 seats, right? New York will lose 5 or 6 seats. They'd be wiped out because they cannot win on their policies, Dan. They have to rig the system to win. Open the border. Yeah, but wait a minute. They're going to kill American citizens. You're letting some criminals and murderers, and they're clearing out their insane asylums. That's something they're apparently willing to live with, too. Just like when they sat quietly when the president said and looked at them, I think it's more important that this government protect American citizens and not illegal aliens. And they didn't support that. The Republicans stood up and cheered, as you did, and the Democrats sat there like this stone face. So in other words, you're saying that illegals in this country are just as important as American citizens. That's their policy. Apparently, that's what they're saying.
Look, these things need to get corrected. President Trump is very determined to correct them. Some people say, wow, he doesn't stop. Enough already. We've got so much going on. Let's take a breath. He feels as if he's got, this time period to correct a number of wrongs. And you want to know what, Chuck? That's what we're doing. Okay. We didn't let the 15 to 20 million in, yet we have to now fund ICE more so to deal with it. Like, for instance, I have these detention centers coming up in my district, down in Schuylkill County and Berks County, in a processing center. We didn't ask for that detention center to be built and be created, but due to the fact that we have 15 million and probably at least 1 million who are criminal illegals, we need to now respond to all of these problems that were caused during this time frame. And that goes for, I go back to healthcare because it's on my mind. Obamacare proved to be a disaster. We have to correct that. What was the direction of our economy, where our military was, right? Our military, nobody wanted to join the military anymore because it was becoming, frankly, too woke, too non-military. And so we're correcting that. From law enforcement to schooling, to the type of racism that exists on college campuses, particularly against Israel and Jews. These things are nuts, and it's what the left somehow thinks is appropriate, right? We're working on correcting that.
Well, Godspeed in those efforts, Dan. Let's turn to the last subject for today, and it'll take a minute. our engagement in Iran. So obviously you get classified briefings and there's things you can and cannot discuss. But the things you can discuss, give us kind of an overview of the path forward here. And let me just say for the record right up front, I find it appalling that Democrats in the Senate and in the House are effectively showing support for Iran, a homicidal, tyrannical theocracy that has dedicated itself to the destruction of the great Satan, us, the United States. And they're about to have an existential threat with nuclear capabilities and long-range ballistic missile capabilities. And somehow they're not supporting the country in a military engagement. I don't understand it. Could you please illuminate me on that?
Well, the message that they're sending when they were fighting against the War Powers Act and the president's constitutional right to create a defense for our country within the parameters of the War Powers Act was sending, and I said to many of my friends that are Democrats, colleagues, whatever, guess who's listening? Iran's listening. And they're getting strengthened by it, right? Inspired by it. Look, Iran is the worst country probably on the face of the earth.
Yes.
It is where terrorism is rooted. It is where terrorism is bred. It is where terrorism is managed and funded. Let's just go back. We could go back all the way to the 80s, crying out loud. But let's just go back to the Hamas massacre in Israel. 26 Americans as well were murdered, okay, by those funded and run and managed by Iran. Okay, that wasn't that long ago. These things continue. All those missiles that come in from Lebanon. Lebanon is a beautiful country. Beirut was a beautiful country. Iran has turned it into a terrorist state, and they use it as their proxy to bomb Israel at will. Okay, we've had past presidents, Obama and Biden, when the Iranians came to the table and said, "Hey, listen, we're really close to building a weaponizing our uranium, so as we're bomb ready." Their response in both cases was, one was pallets of cash, the other was to relinquish the sanctions that were put on Iran for their oil exports, enriching them to tens of billions of dollars. And guess what they did with all that? They don't have too many sports, with maybe the exception of soccer. What they're all about is terrorism and the focus on ridding the earth of Israel from the river to the sea, and guess what? Also America and Americans. So they want to kill us, and that is what their theocracy is all about, because somehow we are the infidels, and somehow they see themselves as righteous people when in fact they're murderers. So that's what we're dealing with, number one. So we sit at the table, and I know this from classifieds. They were getting close, okay? And it's not all classified anymore. This was even a year ago, but it got worse. They actually threatened our last negotiators, Witkoff, that we are within 6 weeks or 7 weeks of a bomb, and if you don't negotiate with us, we're going to develop it, and we will have the bomb. Okay. President Trump's response to that was a lot different than Obama's and Biden's. It was like, guess what? Okay, this is enough. We're not going to pass this along forever and ever. We're going to eliminate this regime. And guess what we're looking to eliminate? Their acts of terrorism. It could still be the same regime. No more terrorism. You're not going to weaponize uranium so you have an atom bomb. And you're not going to massacre your people for protesting in the street. Those are basically the sanity that we're trying to bring to a large country in the Middle East.
Yeah, you gave so much there. So let me start with some of the basics here. How do Democrats, since they're supporting oppressed people and marginalized people all over the world, that was their excuse for supporting Palestine against Israel and the Palestinians. And I understand that many of the Palestinian citizens are blameworthy, and it's tragic. One of in the fog of war, one of the casualties become that. But having said all that, I mean, they were actually taking to the streets, Dan, and supporting the people that had murdered, like the Hamas. Even those people, they were chanting from the river to the sea, students in Ivy League universities and right here in America, so there's that issue. And it gets back to, like I said earlier about the Democrats, how would you not support protecting American lives and ridding the world of an existential threat? But just because Trump did it, they're against it, apparently.
Right. I don't have any words for it.
Yeah.
Right. It is. It is a. Now, most will state, yes, it's a vile country. It's this and that. Maybe there was a better way. Well, we haven't found the better way because it's been going on since about 1979. You can go back to, I think it was 262 Marines in the 80s.
83.
That were blown up by Iran, and it's been the same way all the way through. USS Cole, the IEDs that were being dropped throughout Iraq, the type of fortifications they were giving to any terrorist, the Houthis, the bombing of our attacks on our ships. The idea of living with this forevermore. President took this tactic, not just a tactic. It's a very, very strong tactic, to say the least. And he's looking to create a situation that doesn't create the type of murder and chaos of that it has for the last 47 years. Now, I will also. What's very interesting is this: the Gulf nation, the United Arab Emirates, the Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, all on board with finishing the job. Not saying, hey, what are you doing? This is too much. Finish. It's not just Israel. It's all of the regional countries throughout the Middle East want this resolved once and for all, because they have as much disdain for Iran as the U.S. and Israel have.
Here's how I look at this. For almost 50 years, Iran has been trying to pick a fight with us. Like when you're taught, I took martial arts, always walk away and try to deflect and try to not create the fight, At some point, though, there's no more walls to back up into. At some point, you have to stand and fight when you're dealing with an aggressor who's trying to pick a fight. They've been trying to pick a fight with us for 47 years. We finally obliged them, and we should finish the job.
Our country is really in great shape. There's no question. I was with the president yesterday. There's no question. The president said, we have this excursion. You know what? I just felt the time was right to do this, so we didn't have to, so the next president and the next generation, and this just didn't continue. But our economy's in good shape. Our national security is in good shape. Look, we're having a little bit of rough conversations with some of our allies, but we're trying to correct situations that were not fair over the years. And, I can understand why some of them have problems with this. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but they're going to see, look, we're going to have a reasonable end to this. It's coming. And we, from there on in, we should not be dealing with the type of massacres that we've seen over the years.
Well, Congressman, from your lips to God's ears. On that note, thanks again so much, Dan. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Chuck. Great being with you. Appreciate you. God bless.
God bless. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.